everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today we're reviewing the newest EP from Linkin Park member Mike Shinoda, Post Traumatic. An EP like this is kind of difficult for me to talk about and review, just given what it really is. Now, of course, for those of you unfamiliar with this EP and what it is, why it exists at all, Linkin Park, if you're unfamiliar with, about 6 months ago, last July, lost one of their lead singers, Chester Bennington, unfortunately, to suicide. And that, of course, Linkin Park being one of my favorite bands of all time, and of course them just being a big band as it is with lots of fans out there, it was just something that was, impacted me a lot, impacted many people a lot, and of course you'd have to imagine impacted the band members, the rest of the band members a lot as well. And this EP being made by Mike Shinoda, the other vocalist of Linkin Park, as well as he does a bunch of other instruments in the band and other stuff. He's a really talented guy, but this is just a little short EP that he made, I guess, which is kind of about this time after Chester's death and how it's kind of affected him. And that's why it's kind of difficult to talk about, not just because it's about, Chester's death, which is already a difficult thing to talk about, but also because it's just, this music was clearly made by Mike to just kind of vent, I guess, about these last few months in his life, which you just have to imagine have been not the best, honestly. Between, losing one of your closest friends to, having your whole career kind of put up in the air because your band now is missing one of its members that was, a big part of that band. And, I believe I saw on Twitter, because he was doing out some tweets concerning this EP, answering questions, things like that, and I believe someone asked if Linkin Park was going to continue or things like that. It's something that I wondered initially when this happened. Was the band going to continue? Were they just going to call it quits and maybe just do other projects? And he said that they still weren't sure about that. So this is something that they're still, trying to work out now, 6 months later even. So this is obviously something that's been very, impactful on his life. And I feel like this EP is him just kind of letting go of all this emotions that he's held up in the past 6 months onto a short little project. I mean, this thing is only 3 tracks, a little under 10 minutes in length. It's not particularly long by any means, but the amount of, just content that you get from this thing, it's very incredible in that regard. And I know Mike has his Fort Minor side project where it's just him, kind of his rap solo project where he had an album release and a couple other tracks, things of that sort. This project, of course, isn't released under the Fort Minor name, and that's because, at least this is why I speculate, is just because it's kind of a more personal Mike project. I mean, it does sound a bit different from Fort Minor in the regard that that's kind of a more, not necessarily formal project, but something a bit more, something that has an identity to it, whereas I feel like this thing, the identity of this EP here is just Mike being, honest with his fans, really just kind of saying what's on his mind here about the past 6 months in his life and just the stuff that's been going on. It really is, you listen to this and it really is a Mike Shinoda EP. There's no, other name that it could be under. It's just very clearly him. But make no mistake, the sound of this EP is definitely a more hip-hop oriented sound. Of course, Mike primarily does rapping as well as singing in Linkin Park, so that's what you'd expect. Most of the tracks that he's rapping the verses and things like that, and then he does sing the hooks, which he does very nicely. And I hope that if he ever does decide to make another Fort Minor project, which may very well happen in the future, he does do both of those things. The opening track, Place to Start, on this thing, just kind of starts everything up here. Of course, this EP has a very sad feel to it all the way through, as you could probably guess. The instrumentation that Mike is rapping and singing over here has a very, sad feel to it. And it just goes very nicely with a lot of his verses here and his singing. It just carries the mood of the project very nicely. It doesn't get in the way. It doesn't ever really overpower the vocals, but I feel like that's the point, just because you're really just supposed to kind of focus in on what Mike is rapping and singing about here on this project. That's kind of the main point here. And I think in that regard, the instrumentals do a very good job. And as for some of the actual rapping here on this project, I just feel like Mike is really just, spitting from the heart here on this thing with some of the stuff he's talking about. Like on the track over again, where he's just the verse where he's kind of talking about how it's like him writing the verse itself from the perspective of like the day where they're supposed to have the concert and the performance to remember Chester, and it's like earlier in the day where he's supposed to be writing it, and he's just there's all these emotions going through him, and he's afraid that he's not going to be able to perform well, not because like he doesn't know the material or anything like that, because they've practiced it before, but rather because he just happens to get like hit with sadness at like random times just because of Chester's death, and he's just afraid it's going to happen at the wrong time. And it's just something that's really powerful when you're listening to it. And just when this EP, this isn't something that you can put on as background music or anything like that, because even if you try to do that, it'll just grab your attention and pull you back to the lyrics here, and as you just refocus on what's going on here, because the stories that Mike is telling here, just the way he's delivering it, it just sounds so genuine and so from the heart, the pain that he's feeling here on this thing, that you just can't really ignore it. You just have to pay attention to what he's saying and the story that he's telling, because it's so compelling and just so, heartbreaking as well. You also see Mike on this thing occasionally angry, sometimes at himself, sometimes at the fact that he can't seem to get closure in all of this, the fact that Chester died, he really doesn't have, a sense of closure with one of his best friends, the fact that, there's of course tons of people trying to comfort him, things of that sort, and throughout all of that, there's lots of people asking questions about Linkin Park and all these things, and he just doesn't know what to say to all of it. He doesn't know what's happening with the band, and of course I can imagine when you're grieving for one of your best friends dying, as well as trying to figure out what's going to happen next with your career and all this other stuff going on. I can imagine that especially in the internet age where people have things like Twitter where they can just start asking you questions and things like that, things that could get really frustrating and annoying if you're trying to be focusing on all these things at once. And none of these tracks ever really come off as angry overall, but I just love how you get to see the wide array of emotions that Mike must have been feeling over the past few months. Just, sadness, anger, regret, all these different things, but he manages to display them in such a very genuine way that listening to this thing, like I said, it just hooks you from start to end. I mean, it's not that long of a project to begin with, but even still, it just, you can't take your attention off of this thing at all. So overall, like I said, this isn't exactly the easiest project to really talk about just because of what it is. It's a project that, while it's a good project, I really like Mike's rapping here. I like him opening up, talking about what's just been happening in his life and being real with it on this project. I like the production. I like his rapping. I like his singing on it. Everything I hear is great in my opinion. However, the subject matter itself, the reason why this EP even exists in the first place, is just something I wish didn't exist. So I have to imagine that this is a difficult project for many people to listen to, but it's one that I think is definitely one that you need to listen to if you're a Linkin Park fan, or that's really what this project is going to be aimed at. Fans of Linkin Park. I mean, if you're familiar with Fort Minor, you're probably also familiar with Linkin Park. So, yeah, if you're a Linkin Park fan, I'm guessing you're going to be the one. You're the target audience for this thing. If you're not a Linkin Park fan, but maybe if you've been in the same kind of situation as Mike here, as I've described, maybe you'll also relate to this thing a fair amount. But if you're kind of outside of that range, I'm not sure if you'll get a lot from this because you're not, chances are you don't know everything that's going on and things of that sort, which is, of course, fine. But if you do know Linkin Park, if you like Linkin Park, if you're a big Linkin Park fan like me, you're going to really appreciate this project. You're going to appreciate Mike kind of opening up here on this thing and just being very honest with what he's saying here on this project. And I really like this EP all the way through. It's not an EP that I feel that I'm going to be listening to a ton because, to be honest, it's not exactly a super fun EP to listen to over and over again in the regard that, it's like fun or anything like that, because it's very depressing. That's very apparent. But it's still great. Like I said, Mike's rapping is phenomenal. His singing on the hooks here is great as well. Really makes me look forward to the possibility of more Fort Minor material in the future, because Mike definitely has the ability to do that between his rapping and singing. As well as I also like the production here and how it pairs nicely with both the subject matter that Mike is delivering and his actual delivery of that subject matter. Overall, yeah, this is a great EP in my opinion. But one that is definitely, the audience of this EP is definitely not, it's not an EP that I would just recommend to anyone and just be like, check this out, you're going to like it, because there's a bit more backstory to it that I think you need to understand a bit of first. But yeah, if you're a Linkin Park fan, chances are you already know that backstory, and this is something that you should check out. Once again, I know I've said this in several videos already, between my Linkin Park discography review that I did after Chester's death, as well as several year-end list videos and stuff. But yeah, rest in peace, Chester. Greatly missed, and thank you, Mike, for being brave enough to open up on this project and really kind of talk about the past few months of your life, because I have to imagine that it was not very easy to make a project like this, even though it is only 3 tracks long. I have to these are some of the most personal 3 tracks that I think Mike has ever made, in terms of his verses, subject matter, things like that. Definitely check it out. And with that said, guys, stay golden.